chapter 10 starts essentially where chapter 8 ended, because chapter 9 was a break in the timeline of the narrative, as it was just one big flashback to his childhood and all the memories that he remembers. For example, his mother, the returning home of his father, the father kicking the dog, the street children or the homeless children, and the pipes, etc. Okay, so we're back now into reality, and it starts off where he's obviously, fell asleep, and he's woken up now a couple of hours later, and it's early on Monday morning. And the first thing he does is he thinks to himself, "Where's my knife?" Because that's the first rule that Tsotsi lives by when he wakes up: find your knife. But now Fugard is telling us, listen, the Tsotsi of last week is not the same as the Tsotsi of this week, because there's something else. There's a baby. So in actual fact, for the first time, he doesn't look for his knife first. He actually looks for the baby at the foot of the bed. Then there's knocking on the door, and he wonders who it is. He thinks, is it maybe Miriam, who fed the baby last time, but why would she come on her own accord? Anyway, he finds out it's Diop, and he thinks to himself, things are happening too fast. He was given the baby on Friday night. It is now Monday morning. So we're on the 4th day of this entire story. A lot has happened within that space of time. And it's a lot for Tsotsi to kind of comprehend and take in. And now to have somebody on the outside come and interfere with you trying to remember your past and stuff is obviously not ideal. So he doesn't have too much time for Diop. So he hides the baby under the bed, and he asks Diop, why are you here? And Diop says, well, where else must I go? I have nowhere else to go. I always come here. He then explains, when Tsotsi asks where's Butcher, he says he's gone, he doesn't want to come because he was upset with the fact that on Saturday night you went and did a job on your own without the rest of the gang, and that was of course Morris Shabalala, and so he's not interested. So Diop is coming and saying, listen, I'm loyal, here I am, let's start over, just the two of us, we'll find some other guys. And well, the first thing Tsotsi thinks about is his mother and all the memories of the previous night. He wants to know more about his mother. He's decided he can't just leave it at that. He can't just move on and pretend nothing's happened. So ultimately he tells Diop that, listen, I'm not actually interested. The gang is done, and that's over. And that's on page 128. But just before that, Tsotsi asks him, well, why didn't you go with Butcher? And Diop says, it's been 2 years we've been together. You're just going to flog me off now after all this time. Then the baby starts crying, and well, at first Diop thinks it's coming from outside, and then he realizes that the baby's actually in the room. But he doesn't say anything because Tsotsi doesn't say anything, and he thinks, okay, well, Tsotsi obviously doesn't want to talk about it. And then, as I said, on page 128, he tells Diop, listen, we're done, you're not interested in the gang anymore, you must go off and do your own thing. And so off he goes. It's quite interesting as well that Fugard makes Diop look like a fool because he hasn't got any front teeth anymore, he's got nowhere to go, he's on his own, he doesn't really speak coherently. So that's Fugard's way of saying that there's actually a distinction now between Tsotsi, who's seeking redemption essentially, and Diop, who wants to just carry on his evil ways and being in this gang and following what somebody else tells him to do. So off he goes. Then the baby cries again, and Tsotsi goes and brings it from under the bed, and he's glad he has this baby. What's important here, everything about it that touched or could be touched by one of his senses gave him satisfaction. This was reality, to be heard, to be felt, to be smelt. This was no phantom from his past that came like a dream remembered. Okay, so unlike the memories of the previous night, there's still gaps in understanding, and it's all new to him. And remember, it's only been 4 days, and within these 4 days he's had a lot of new things to think about and try and understand. So what he likes about the baby is the fact that he can actually see this baby, and he can smell the baby. Even though it smells bad, it's real. It's something that he can understand, and he sees this baby as a channel to go to his childhood and try and remember what happened. Okay, so he needs the baby to activate that remembering, essentially. And even though the smell and noise and things like that that bothered him at first don't bother him now because of the reality of them. The baby had become the repository of Tsotsi's past. The baby and David himself, that is, at first confused, had now merged into one and the same person, which is why he actually names the baby David after himself. He could sympathize with the baby in its defenselessness against the terrible events awaiting it. And the reason for that is, well, the baby is completely at the mercy of Tsotsi, right? Now, Tsotsi, as a 10-year-old boy, was also completely at the mercy of the police when they took his mother, and at the mercy of his father, because he was all alone, and the father kicking the dog. He couldn't do anything about it, and then he runs off. And what happens? He gets joined with these other children, homeless children, and he's at their mercy for food and water and somewhere to sleep, etc. So he understands the defenselessness of the baby. Then sometime later, Miriam Gidi, who is the lady who fed the baby last time, goes to the water queue, and she's standing there in the queue, and eventually she fills a bucket up, and then she starts coming back. Now, Tsotsi can see her and this tap from his room, and he's like looking through the window. Okay. He then leaves the window and goes to the door, opening it and stepping outside so she can see him. When she had come to within a few steps of him, he turned and went into the room, and she follows him. He actually says that he thinks that she would have come to him whether he, show, eye contact with her or not. In other words, she would have come there on her own accord, he believes, because she seemed very prepared. In other words, she had ointment, she had powder, which we can assume is talcum powder, and she even had clean clothes for the baby. So the assumption is that she cares about this baby, she doesn't want anything to happen to it, she would have come anyway. So he doesn't actually ask her to come in, but the eye contact and all, of course, she understands that he wants her to come in. And on page 131 is where he confesses or admits that the baby's name is David, named after him, of course. Then she begs him to give the baby to her. She asks twice, "He is sick, give him to me and I will take him and look after him," with good intentions. Tsotsi over here jumps back to his automatic response as a gangster, thinking, let me grab my knife and violence, let me kill her. But because he's changed, he doesn't do that. He starts thinking about the baby. He says to himself, "I gave the baby milk. Me, I did. On a Saturday in a shop, I bought it. And I killed the ants." So Tsotsi's thinking that he's quite proud of himself. He's taking pride in what he's done to look after this baby, because he was responsible for killing the ants and buying it milk. But now you and I know that it takes a little bit more than just buying milk and killing some ants to look after a baby. Anyway, so she continues feeding the baby. Now on page 132, this whole area here is another flashback to a moment of his childhood. And that is this game that they used to play, the homeless children and him, with this old car that obviously drove into the river ditch, which there was no river running there anymore. It was just full of rubbish, and the car had been stripped of things that could be sold, and scrap metal and things like that. So there's just a frame left essentially, and they used to play in this car, and it talks about how only the driver was allowed to make the noises, etc. So that's another memory that's just out of the blue come in, but it's brought on by the baby. And also Miriam there feeding the baby with that motherly touch and that. Then it talks about her trying to still ask him to give her the baby, and he says, "He is mine." He says it 3 times. He's very protective over this baby. He needs the baby, even though he kind of realizes that he can't look after the baby on his own. It's still something that he's proud of, and he needs the baby in order to go back to his childhood and to change who he is, and this whole kind of transition of redemption that he's after. She asks him, "Where did you get the baby?" "He was given to me." Correct. "And the mother, she ran away in the night." Also correct. They have quite a lengthy conversation. His eyes were excited, his hands trembling, because never before had he spoken so many words at once. This is a change for Tsotsi. This is the first time in a long time that he's been able to have a full conversation and speak. Why speak so well? Because he's actually genuinely excited. It means something to him. Now, this is also the first time that we as the reader have seen Tsotsi being excited about something and filled with joy. Here, no more revenge, no more hate. The riddle of the yellow bitch was solved. The images that he used to have of this dog with its back legs not working, crawling along, was only half a memory. Now he knows what happened, so that's solved, all right? He decides he's not going to hate anymore. He's not going to be violent anymore. He finds out that he discovers that he must find out more about his past. That's his mission now. Because they can't come to an agreement, he wants to keep the baby, she wants to look after the baby, he needs her to look after the baby. Miriam says that she will come in the afternoon at the same time to feed the baby, and that seems to be okay tomorrow. He picked up the baby and slipped out. So after she's left, he takes the baby into the street and up to the ruins, but he checks behind him just in case Miriam has been following him, and then when he leaves, she'll take the baby, because he's very protective of this baby, can't lose the baby. The pipes, he goes to the pipes of the memory, in other words, where he stayed with the homeless children when he was 10. And there they are. He also finds the shell on the motor car. So he realizes that it's not something that his mind has made up or tricked him into thinking, that it is in fact what happened. It is real. It happened to him. And lastly, on the chapter, it says he slipped into the first shebeen to ask after the whereabouts of Boston. Now, two thoughts here. Is he concerned about Boston and feels bad for what he did to him and thinks I must go and find him so I can look after him? Or does he need Boston for something else? Well, I'll have to read further to figure that one out. And I've written here, for Tsotsi, there is some hope of decency. Remember, Boston kind of said, do you have any decency or whatever? Well, there actually is some now by the looks of it. The arrival of the baby and the memories and the lifestyle changes that it begins to spark off indicate that he has the potential to achieve decency and to escape the state of inhumanity that rule his present existence. And so the question comes to the reader, is it possible for Tsotsi to be redeemed, to have some form of redemption, to be forgiven? Or has he done too many bad things? Has he killed too many people already that there's no hope for him? And also, of course, in the apartheid circumstances, no matter what happens to him on a personal level, is there actually really any hope for him to live a better life? And that, of course, is up for debate.